So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the first meeting of the Subcommittee on Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Justice. I'm Val Frias. I'm going to turn it over soon to Janae Taro, who is the Senior Director of Equity. He's going to give us a presentation on where the district is to date. We've come together with this subcommittee born of many issues around equity and inclusion, from the data that we saw on MCAS and other accountability metrics to the walkouts at the high school, among the staff issues that have been raised up to us. This committee is really going to be focused on accountability of the district to the school committee. So we want to make sure that, to use the parlance that we use a lot lately, that we stay in our lane in terms of governance and accountability, but that we really are partnering with the district and the community to make sure that that we are holding folks accountable and that we're responsive to community need. So without further ado, I just want to hand it over to Janae for a presentation, unless anybody else on school committee wants to say anything opening. Stephen does.
I'll just say, I like that introduction, Val, but instead of just saying accountability, I would say accountability, transparency, and visibility. I think part of the role of this committee is to hold the district accountable, but the other part is to lift it up and to make sure that the community can see it clearly for what it's doing. So I just wanted to throw that in there.
Janae, you're up.
Great, sure. So hi, everybody. Good to see you all. Happy June. I guess it's been June for a few days now. So I guess I'm going to share my screen. Is that right, Bill? Yeah.
Yes, Robin, can you give her screen sharing? Robin's host right now.
I think you should.
Yeah, I can. Thank you. Okay, so we should put this in. Sorry, give me 1 second. I'll put this in slideshow mode. Okay, yeah, a couple things. Hi, everybody. I just thought that what I would do is kind of condense and be a little brief as we think about our agenda today, and kind of just a refresher, a little bit of review of a little bit of what I shared with the school committee. I feel like it was in February, kind of lost track of dates, but this is sort of a year-end perspective, just a little bit of some conversation around what we have been working on in the Office of Equity, just a very, very sort of brief summary, and then some recommendations for how I'm feeling this subcommittee can partner and do the things that Stephen just mentioned and what you said as well, Val. So you might recognize this slide from way back before when I presented initially, just with my entry plan and what some of my goals were in starting the work this year, what some of that data collection looked like, and then getting into our whys, which we'll talk a little bit about in just a moment. But then mostly this short deck today is really just to sort of share the roadmap that we're currently on, and some thinking about our next steps. And again, that I think are sort of informed by this committee. So the first thing was just our DBE Spectrum. Again, I went over that at great detail a couple of months ago, but we're doing a lot of work in using this tool as a diagnostic, honestly, to sort of chart where we think we are, what it means for us as a district, and what this means for us as individuals in terms of what our diversity work actually means and what it looks like. How are we pushing on and working around belonging? We know that we have a number of students and adults, quite frankly, family members in the district who don't necessarily always feel that sense of belonging. So we're talking about that work and what that looks like, inclusion, what that means for us, and obviously, as we move on this journey toward equity. One of the things that I had mentioned again in this presentation, and as I go across the district sharing this, is that this work, when done well, takes about 8 years, 8 to 10 years, honestly, to get to where we're feeling like we're really an equitable, anti-bias, anti-racist school system, and that a lot of the work that we're currently doing is already moving us there. And I'm happy to say more about that later, but I just wanted to present this slide just to show that this is what we continue to work on. And this is really a tool that we're being guided by. We talk about technical versus adaptive challenges and what that actually means. So when we think about technical challenges, we know that this is the what's required really is just, the learning, the creation of tools. So it's surveys, it's panorama survey, so student voice data, anything that looks like PLCs. We have ELTs in so equity learning teams in a lot of the schools right now, those kinds of things. What are our interventions look like? So that's the sort of the clearly defined work that helps us shift our skill sets. And then the adaptive challenges, which are much, much harder, right? Adaptive challenges are harder to define. They're really like the heart and mind work, which is what equity work is. We need the technical, but the adaptive those are sort of the problems that, if we could solve them quickly and easily, they wouldn't be adaptive challenges. So this involves experimentation. It's sort of design thinking, that kind of stuff, the resistance work. So we're doing a lot of sort of picking and choosing. We're doing adaptive work with our school leaders and even some of that adaptive work with educators at the classroom level. So then the why, now I'd shared this before as well, sort of what is our why? What is our equity story? Everyone should have one. I like to say, and we'll get to the slide where I talk about sort of the 3 levels of our why, but a lot of that has been sort of, we're gonna move work and we think about our theory of change. A lot of that, as far as I'm concerned and from our office, is looking at what is our why, not so much the what or the how, but what is our why for equity in PSB? What is our why? Oops, I don't want to play that video. No. Okay. I'm just going to keep going. Okay. So again, sort of how are we defining these whys? So why take up the work of race and equity in our work and practice? Why take up the work of all the levels, layers involved with equity? Well, because it's a moral piece. Equity is important in the world for all of us, and it's about the deepening of humanity. So thinking about centering that moral why, and then what is the personal why for individuals in the community? Why is dismantling inequity so important to you? And then the third why is just our district why, and that third bullet is all about our data, our chart data. So our demographics, our high needs, our economically disadvantaged, our enrollment data, our attendance data, our retention data, our pathways, et cetera, et cetera. And so on this next slide, as an example, what we're trying to do is look at every demographic in our district. We need to understand exactly who is here. So in the left, there's the DESE student profile data, which we use a lot, which literally shows us all of our demographic groups. And so the question has been, what are we doing to meet the needs of every demographic group that we have? What are we doing to elevate and celebrate and value those different groups? And so again, there's just some more examples here. Trying to look at our discipline data, our attention data, et cetera, as an office of one. It's been hard to get to all of this, but this is where we're beginning and some of what we've been thinking about. Another piece that we work a lot with in terms of PD in the district is looking at the 4 eyes of oppression. I could go into great detail on what that's all about, but these are interlocking, interconnected, all interlocking and interconnected. They do not operate in isolation. And so as we think about our whys and as we think about so many of the pieces that we confront in terms of our different demographics, which of these pieces are operating and in what ways and what work can we do around those? So just another graphic to show you what we've been working on all year long and we'll continue to work on. Scarf threats, this is one last thing to let you know about. I didn't bring scarf threats up in my initial presentation to the school committee. And yet, even as recently as this past Saturday morning from 9 to 12, a group of administrators met with me and another administrator to run through what we mean by scarf threats and how we identify them within ourselves and use them for our equity work. So in 2008, David Rock I forget the whole long title of his study on the brain, but he basically, SCARF stands for the 5 key domains that influence our behavior in social situations. So this is all based on neuroscience research, and he talks about how the 5 domains activate the same threat and reward responses in our brains. And so I'm not going to go through all of them, but we identify what are the threats that are most prominent for each of us. Is it status, our relationship or relative importance to others? Is it certainty and how much we want to be able to predict and control, like 10 years down the line, we know exactly what's going to happen? Or autonomy. Brookline's a big district, obviously, around autonomy, being able to control the events, again, knowing what's going to happen. Relatedness, how our work and who we are connects with others, and fairness, what's fair, what's not fair. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about these pieces, and again, how our SCARF threats interfere or interact with the ways in which we go about equity work, and then those folks that we work with. So SCARF threats are big for us right now. And I think about SCARF threats in relationship to the district, and thinking about the work of this committee and my goals and hopes moving forward. So, and I'll read a little bit from this slide, but we're really making a pitch to the broader SCARF threats in place within the town itself. Never mind the district, to get traction moving forward. So my diagnoses after a year is that the SCARF threats for the town are status and certainty. And I like to say getting up on the balcony rather than being down on the dance floor, but up on the balcony, we can actually see everything and make some decisions in a way that doesn't feel so harmful, because when you're on the dance floor, your toes are getting stepped on. So as an educator of color, I'm trying to elevate a little bit. And that's what I'm hoping others can do too. But so getting up on the balcony and really pitching our work in a way that makes people feel lifted up and seen and expert, because I feel like SCARF threats is a part of what we're operating with in Brookline. So I'm proposing things like a pilot, and I know this came up during the contract negotiations and things like that, but a small working group that sort of really focuses on the excellent teaching that we have in this district and the ways in which we are differentiating to all of our different learners and their different needs, thinking about some case studies that highlight educational equity in Brookline. I've tried to do a little bit of this via the website. But again, as one person, I haven't really had the time to do that to the degree that I would like. Speaking to certainty, obviously this requires getting granular about what the Office of Equity is actually doing and what we as a subcommittee, what we as a district are calling people to do. So I've got some questions about when the pilot could happen and what are its goals and how we would measure success, but that's something that I would love to sort of think about and maybe work with our subcommittee to think about. The last piece here is, again, using data and the creation of data stories for each of those demographic groups to build urgency. And so this is a part of the diversity work that includes acknowledging and celebrating all students before we go into the harder things, not that we're ignoring them, but sort of taking a step back before we really dive into the disproportionality and the marginalization. We're working on those pieces and thinking about taking that step back to really make sure we're all clear on who we actually have here, because I don't know that we always are. I had shared this slide before, the planning for impact, the 4 years. All of these bullets need to be ticked off in my mind until we can go to the next. I could spend a lot of time here, but we don't have that time, but here's that. And then also planning for impact for 5+ years in our roadmap. You'll notice we're just to inclusion at that point in an emerging way, not even quite at equity, but obviously these pieces are all being worked on simultaneously. It's not like one after another. It's not necessarily linear. This next slide just is my sort of brain dump of all the work that I've been doing. Actually, it's not all of the work, but it's a lot of the work, just to give just an overview of some of the ways in which I've been spending my time over the course of this year. I should take those hours away. I was just trying to tabulate for myself why I have no time in my life. But anyways, I thought I would share just some of the pieces there that I've been working on to date. I do think, to Stephen's point, that communication out about what this office is actually doing, super, super helpful, because sometimes I don't think that that's always clear. It's hard to be doing the work and communicating broadly about the work at the same time. The last thing for me here is just my suggested priorities for our subcommittee. Obviously, this is all open for our discussion, but based on what I've been doing this year, this is what I'm walking away with. So the first thing is that we leverage those data stories that I mentioned to elevate urgency within the district. And this will support making deeper connections between the Office of Teaching and Learning, and the Office of Student Support Services. And I can talk more about what that's already looking like, but those data stories, leveraging those is super powerful. The second is leveraging what we know is coming to build value for equity work systemically. So the state is talking about rolling out a new curriculum when we look at evaluations and educator goals that prioritizes that all Massachusetts educators must design goals and design curriculum and lessons through a lens of SEL, which obviously we've been talking a lot about here in Brookline, UDL, which is just universal design learning, and linguistic equity. So because this is coming, it's in the pipeline. What would it look like for us to get ahead of it? And again, I'm thinking about this pilot or this group that's working and with the reinforcement from the DEIJ subcommittee to create an example of excellence that others may need to opt into future work. So getting ahead of it and doing things like saying every educator is going to have an equity goal. We're not necessarily requiring it. We are strongly encouraging that and equipping supervisors to check for this work. My B here is just the system-wide vision-based PD plan, which is all about creating anti-racist and anti-bias school communities. And so I can talk about this a little bit more later, but we've already secured a speaker for PD Day for 2022, who's going to set the template. Her name's Debbie Irving. She's the author of Waking Up White. I've been working closely with her group to roll out an entire plan of sort of getting our district sort of aligned. Now that I've had a year to kind of collect information and we're working on a strategic plan, it's time to get going with the vision for moving forward. The last thing here is just managing expectations within our community. Again, illuminating the work that the Office of Equity is doing would be super helpful. Just naming very concretely that the Office of Equity can only do 1 to 2 things well in the absence of support. Instead of doing a million things halfway, I'd like to think about what it means to do a couple of things well and measure our work. I'm pushing for communication support, as I'd already mentioned, and partnering with OSS for more of the building-based support around racial and bias incidents. So equipping our counselors and our adjustment counselors in school so that I am not necessarily one person filling in when there are racial incidents or bias incidents, but that we're equipping people in the buildings to be able to respond to these and also do the proactive work, which I'm happy to partner with. Elevating equity to cohere with OTL, which includes curriculum audits, the adoption of new curriculum, and requiring PD, meaning so many times a year, there's certain PD that educators need to be getting. Again, I had already mentioned this, but supporting accountability for educator equity goals via their supervisors. And then the last piece is just reinforcing the existing work on strategic diversity hiring and retention. The BEAD team has been working on that. Different groups and different folks have been working on that all along. I'm not always so sure how many people know this. And then obviously there is the group that was sort of formed with the contract to meet with me to work on these issues as well. So that's pretty much it for me. I tried to get done in 15 minutes. It was probably longer than that, but I can stop share.
So I'm sure there are lots of questions. I have a couple. I'll start with the sort of micro. So the ELTs that you were talking about, I think I saw a number on a different slide, but how many of those are there going right now?
Oh gosh, so there's eight, there are 8 ELT courses, if you will. And then 3 schools do them. So BHS does them, Driscoll does them, and Runkle does them. So I forget my math, but they meet monthly. So I make a new sort of course for 8 different courses for the 3 schools every month.
Okay. And then
I can tell you those topics, Val, if you're interested. Like we have an LGBTQ IA plus ELT that meets. We have a racial literacy or equity literacy group that meets. We have an ally co-conspirator group that meets. I can give you, there's 8 of them.
But so are these opt-in? How are they sort of
Yep.
selected?
They're required. They happen during faculty meeting time. And so at the beginning of the year, we roll them out. And so on Tuesday afternoons, once a month, every educator self-selected into one based on where they felt they were on their journey. And like I said, they get the material every month, and they're now in the process. Driscoll and Runkle, I was just meeting with the Runkle vice president, principal president. They are going to be sharing out their work with their family members and colleagues in their meetings tomorrow.
Okay, and then I think you said work with building leaders in all the buildings. And can you just talk a little bit about what that looks like?
So
I'm trying to get a hand. Yeah, you do so much. I just want to get a
Sure.
handle on.
So we have principal meetings twice a month. So on Wednesdays, they're full day meetings and then half day meetings. And so in those principal meetings, we have been working on things like scarf threats. We've been working on stakeholder mapping. A lot of the equity adaptive work that I do happens at those meetings. So those are also every month.
And I know everybody else has questions, but I just want to ask one more on the piece of the slide where you were talking about ways that you thought this committee could be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
Can you just say a little bit more about how the committee would integrate on the data story piece?
Sure. Yeah. I think that honestly, when I say I'm thinking about like a dedicated group, what I wonder is, and that group is a group of educators, obviously, but what I wonder is if some of the work that group is doing around those data stories, there's some reporting with this subcommittee and some feedback or some questions from this committee to help shape and form the way those are designed and even the way they're disseminated or shared. Because again, I think there's plenty of the work to do. And I have so many things that we can do. I don't have the bandwidth to help communicate and share and elevate those pieces. So I would just love sort of thought partner insight, that kind of thing, in terms of those.
Great, thanks. Mariah?
Thanks, and thanks, Janae, for the presentation. I have 2 thoughts on it. One is, I resonate with this idea of the data stories, and it goes back to the question I asked, I think at full school committee a month or so ago, and I think Linus is on this meeting, so I'm gonna repeat it, which is this idea of being able to get whatever the metrics are that we think of are meaningful for different students. I think the metric that was presented to us at Steps to Success was % of students who are failing at least one course.
Yeah.
And, whatever those metrics are, but looking at that by our overall population and then by, for example, students participating in STEPS, students participating in any one of the number of programs we have, demographic populations, so that we can start to look at some of what, as you say, the stories are here, not only the stories that there are to tell, but the stories of where we need to do work.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to reiterate that request and hope that we can get that pretty soon, because I think it's really meaningful, at least to my understanding of what some of this work is about. And the second thing I want to say is that the content that's in the presentation, particularly I'm going to reflect on the slide that you had, which included all the things you do. And there's like 20 things on that slide. And it's a lot. And I wonder if, not that you would necessarily step anything back that you started, but how we can, prioritize among these things, especially as you're about to double your office to be an office of 2 instead of 1. What are the sort of signature programs that you think are going to have the most impact, and how can we support you in bringing those programs forward? And for example, the ELT program that you were just talking about, if I understood correctly, is only running at 3 schools. Is that the kind of thing that we should be doing more at other schools as well, or just what that looks like? I would like to be able to be an advocate, as Stephen said at the beginning, and bring visibility to things. And right now there's so much stuff I'm having a hard time even being able to understand it. And I would like to maybe have a little bit of an opportunity to refine that, so that we have the programs that you think are the most impactful getting the most airtime and us being able to talk about them the most.
Yeah, this sort of dovetails into our next topic, but I agree, Mariah. I think that, we need to hopefully, Janae, understand a couple of these pretty well and be able to focus on them, because I think as we look toward a work plan and a charge for school year 22 to 23, we want to make sure that we're doing something that is meaningful, that's lifting up the work of your office, but that also is impactful. Suzanne, unless Mariah, is your hand still up? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm thinking Stephen should go first, because I'm just.
Okay, I didn't see Steve. Go ahead, Steve.
Thanks for that presentation. I just have a small question, Janae. On your slide of suggested priorities, you propose a system-wide vision-based PD plan. Is there a reason why can you talk a bit about why you see PD as the key tool in a plan? Are there other tools that we can consider in enacting programs? Or is that really the key tool?
So I think for me, the professional learning is we're a learning institution, right? And so giving educators time in their day to learn new things before we ask them to do new things feels really important to me. I feel like in Brookline, I hear a lot, and I felt it as a teacher, that I'm being told, okay, we're doing this now, but I didn't get any training or teaching in it. And so for me, it's important that we've talked a lot about, whether it's ableism or racism or homophobia, whatever the case may be, we've talked about how we expect educators to be, these are the pronouns you need to use, or this is how we, et cetera, et cetera. So I do believe strongly in the professional learning piece of this. I also think that, and this maybe goes to Mariah's comment too, as we learn more about who the families are that we're serving and who the colleagues are that we work alongside, that some of that learning about each other helps us to do better by each other. And I don't know other ways of having that happen unless it's in a PD professional learning type model. And I do have lots of, I'll tell you, of all that Mariah asked about the 3 schools that are doing ELTs, what are the other schools doing? Well, I'm going around and doing presentations at those faculty meetings, and I collect evaluations and feedback on all of those. And we have so much amazing evaluation feedback on ELTs, on faculty meeting presentations, where people are saying, I need more of this. This was so helpful to have this time to talk with my colleague and work around this problem together. So I'm sure there are other things that we can do, but this PD model and everybody sort of moving at least with one foundational piece of vision learning feels really important to me.
Okay, thanks, Janae. That's helpful. I'm asking in part because so Andy and I were in a forum last night on special education, and the topic of professional development came up, and I think we're we recognize that the demand for teachers' time and professional development is at a premium right now.
Mhm.
And I don't, I reacted to this slide by thinking, I don't want this to be a bottleneck. So I hear you and I agree with you that PD seems like is the key tool to affect this vision. But I wonder if we could simply broaden the statement to say that we'll create a system-wide vision-based plan for creating these communities so that we can
Fair.
incorporate other tools if necessary.
Love
It could be communities of practice, professional learning communities.
Mhm,
That
mhm.
that could be part of PD, but it also could be
Sure.
separate from it in terms of not in that competing for the time.
I love that. I agree. Thank you.
Okay.
Suzanne?
No, thank you. So just to add on to that, I think, Stephen, in the past, when we think of PD, we think of that, 1 or 2 times and it's a lecture and you just take notes like a college course. Whereas I think, Janae, what I'm hearing is it's much more like a professional learning community. It's an equity learning community. And so the teachers are actually guiding where it goes and are working together to share what it is they need to understand. So I know it's a PD, but it's not quite the PD that we traditionally think of. And I think it's much more powerful what Janae has described. So is that fair, Janae?
Yeah, I think of it as professional learning opportunities. Sometimes they happen on Tuesdays after school during contractual hours and in other ways. The educators have been super creative. We've been able to, because to Stephen's point, we don't have a lot of time.
Right.
So, yeah.
So I had a couple of questions. I believe that your department got a grant for an Asian equity person. Is that true? So will you have 3 people now or?
No, so we
Oh.
did, I partnered with BaFin to write a Brookline Asian American Parent Network, or Family Network, I should say, we wrote a BCF grant, and we did get $50,000, and we are using those funds to help support 1 additional person in the office, yes. So just, there will be one, I'm doubling, yes.
One additional, because did we not put 1 additional person in our budget? No?
We did.
Yeah, so that you should have 2.5 people. I don't know. Something to look into anyway.
Wait, is it a half-time person or a full-time person?
It's 1 full-time person that's coming to, that's joining the office.
From BaFin's, from the Racial Equity Fund, or from the district's funding?
It's both, but it's going into 1 position, and we are looking for a person who can help support the AAPI community. Yes.
So I think we should look into that, Linus, because I thought that we voted for a full-time position in addition, and that this would be a grant that would allow another position. So I'm a little.
That was what I thought too. So if Linus can clarify.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so it is 1, so in our budget, we built in 1 additional position. And so Janae, in working with BaFin, as she articulated, said we'd like to focus this particular hire, if possible, to focus on our AAPI community. And so these additional funds will be utilized to support the new person that we're bringing on. So it's not an additional person that we're going to add to what we already have. We're going to use that. We're going to leverage those funds for this current position.
Well,
even though this position was already fully funded in our budget.
Well, what we're looking at, so part of what's happened is now that we're launching, we're recognizing that we're not going to be competitive in order to fully realize the position that we've added. So we're going to do some leverage the additional resources that we have to support that position. And then when we come with our next year's budget, we'll be able to pull that resource fully into our current position.
Okay, well, I'm a little disappointed because I thought we gave him a full position, and then I thought you got a grant that gave you another position. So if there's a way to do that, I would be all for it. So
We can interpret as that as well, but I know right now the market share that where we have it budgeted for, it's not as competitive as,
okay.
Once Janae started digging in it further and looking at others that were out there, it's going to be hard
Okay.
to bring it in competitively.
Okay,
bring an individual into that role competitively.
okay. So Janae had a couple more. One is, it's sounding like SEL is taking on equity work. Is that what's happening? Or, I mean, I'm sounding like, to me, they're different, it's different work. And so,
Matt and I work pretty closely together because we feel strongly that SEL isn't real SEL if it's not taking into account the equity pieces. And there's a lot of scholarship that talks about SEL as white supremacy with a hug, unless you know how to speak appropriately, manage it appropriately in terms of diverse communities. And so we see the two as very much combined. And that's why I even mentioned in the slide deck that it feels important to me to be working with our counselors and our adjustment counselors, our social workers, to think about students who are struggling or disheartened, whatever the case may be, because of racial or bias things that are happening in their school community and in the world, quite frankly. And so that partnering feels really important. So they're different and they're married.
I see the marriage. I just don't want equity to lose ground to SEL. SEL is so big right now and everybody's talking about it, but they don't usually put the word equity in there. And so I just, if there's a marriage, I think it's got to be have a full voice for sure under SEL. And so my last question for now is, if a student feels that, they've been steered in a direction that maybe they shouldn't be, and it's an equity issue, is there a place for them to go that they could talk to somebody? I don't know if it's a complaint or just an understanding, or if it's a misunderstanding. I mean, we've just heard stories about students who've been steered towards not going to honors or going to honors and not AP when, the teachers may or may not be well-intentioned, but I think the students need to be heard when they feel that way.
100%. Yes. And it's something that I almost put into the presentation. And again, I don't want to overwhelm with too much. And we don't technically have a place for that. I took a long call yesterday last week from an educator who needed just to be heard, who's an educator of color, and then a student the day before. So, I do the best I can with that. And I know that there are, for example, if we're talking about race issues for students, there are only so many educators of color in our district sometimes, and they didn't necessarily sign up to be the after school resource there too. So I think it's all connected. There's obviously also white identifying adults who can mentor and work with those students. In terms of a formal place, I was almost said to Dr. Guillory earlier today that it feels important to be able to voice, here's an hour or something like that. If you want to just come, he and I have said this multiple times throughout the district, if you want to talk, send us an email and we'll find a way to meet with you and talk with you. Students is a little bit harder. And so we're hoping to really elevate adults there in their buildings who can be those supports for kids. But yeah, it's something to work on. I agree.
Okay. Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Val, for that.
Sure. I have a couple more, but first Andy and then Mariah.
Thanks, Val. So I guess Stephen spoke at the beginning about visibility, and Janae mentioned community recognition, and Janae and Mariah were talking about data stories. I'm wondering, would it be worthwhile, would it be useful if at school committee meetings we set aside kind of regular dedicated time, sort of along the lines of Dr. Guillory's Spotlight on Excellence, that would be devoted to things that your office wanted to highlight, and it need not always be something celebratory, right? If it was a piece of data that you wanted to highlight, it could be that as well. Is that something that would be helpful?
I think it's an interesting idea. When Mariah talked about the data stories as a way to sort of celebrate, and I agree. And I forgot exactly, Mariah, what your wording was, but in my mind, one of the main purposes of the data stories is to say, here's the data and it's not good. Here's how it's changed. Here's what we're doing to work on it and impact it and, sort of track it over time. So I do think that that's important. Should that be something that happens every school committee? It could.
I mean, I'm wondering whether it would be better actually to have like more frequent but shorter things rather than sort of occasional long presentations that have to cover a lot of ground.
Yeah.
And it would necessarily have to stay at a very abstract level.
Yeah. I like the short. My hope for this second person coming in is somebody who can help me, or find a couple minutes in their life to really collect and have the data, in a way that's shareable community-wide. So I do like that. I think it's incredibly important for this.
Last thing I want to do is make more work for you, but given that everybody so far has talked about visibility, this is one way to make it happen and to be flexible.
Well, it could be versions of presentations presented in this meeting also. It could be like workshop, it's just in the same way that we share out and have from other subcommittees.
Right.
And the way Spotlight on Excellence works is that Dr. Guillory doesn't do the presenting, right? It's the people who did the work who also do the presenting. So.
Right. Thank you. That's good.
Mariah.
I want to go back to this staffing question. And I want to understand a little bit more. I guess I feel deeply uncomfortable with the idea of having an office of two, in which one person is fully dedicated specifically to one racial group. And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that.
Sure. So I should say that the position is called the Assistant Director of Educational Equity, which means that person gets to do a lot of what I do, maybe not all of it, but a lot of it. And so what that means is that person isn't necessarily only spending their time meeting with and working on behalf of Asian American students. Certainly that person gets to have an ear toward that community, families, educators, and students, but that person is also dividing and conquering, as I mentioned. So I've got 2 schools working on ELTs tomorrow that I need to finish up while I'm presenting at Pierce. As we roll out the work next year, this way I don't have to divide myself into 3. Somebody else can go and present at a school while I'm at one school. So Mariah, I would say that it's not that the person's role is only to be devoted to one race. The person's looking at intersectionality and all of the many things that I mentioned, because again, if you look at that slide, this person can't just go and focus on Asian American issues and still leave all the rest of that to me. So it's a sharing.
How does that comply with the terms of the grant and what was written in the grant proposal though?
Yeah, so we worked for a while. Chi Wu and Alicia and I worked for a while to come up with the language for that. I can share the job description with you. The understanding is that this person is, again, is an assistant and a help toward issues for students of color or families of color with an eye toward the AAPI community.
And this is a 1-year grant, Janae?
The grant that we got, yes, is 1 year, but the position is one that will need to continue beyond the year.
Right. So if I heard Dr. Guillory correctly, we're going to be in a bit of a bind in terms of being able to fund the position on a regular basis, right? I mean, it's going to be maybe a different conversation for Sam or Linus at a different time, but it seems like if we only have grant funding for 1 year to make it competitive, that we're going to have to find that gap somewhere in the next fiscal year. Okay, other questions for Janae? Thank you, Janae. That was great. We next on our agenda had sort of charge of the committee and then work plan, which I sort of find very much related. And if committee members are amenable to discussing them together, I'd sort of like to hear from folks on their thoughts for a work plan for FY23 after hearing what Janae said and her suggestions, and perhaps taking some of those adding some, changing some? I'd love to hear what folks are thinking after that presentation in terms of something that lifts the office up, as we've all said, and keeps folks accountable and also is responsive to the community. Those were our charges broadly defined, and back in the winter spring when the subcommittee was formed. Mariah.
So thinking specifically about the work plan of the committee, one thing I would like to do, and this ties in with many of our previous initiatives, is to have an opportunity to do some of the community listening that we've talked about through our communication plan, but to what extent this committee can perhaps lead that charge in reaching out to different communities and setting that up, I think would be really valuable. Identifying and reaching out and having school committee specific listening sessions would be really helpful.
I'm on mute. Sorry. Do you think over the summer, or what are you thinking in terms of timing of that? So that
I'm thinking that that's not necessarily a summer activity, but a planning over the summer for a full year activity.
Yeah.
And thinking about how to do this in a way that reaches different communities, not so infrequently that they feel like they're not being heard from, or being heard, but also isn't overwhelming in terms of scheduling of meetings and being able to absorb the feedback.
So you see the listening sessions as item 1 for work plan for FY23.
I don't know if it's item 1, but it's something that I think that item 1 to me is about helping provide, to me, the item 1 is helping provide a feedback tool for the Office of Educational Equity to continue to refine that work, but it goes in parallel with that, but perhaps number 2 on the list.
Okay.
And maybe even lower down, but it's really important to me. I feel like in recent experiences where we've had the chance to do these listening sessions, they're so valuable and they're so appreciated that we need to do them more.
Totally agree. Feedback tool, anything else, Mariah, that was on?
No, that was my
Okay.
sort of thing that hadn't necessarily come up yet that I wanted to mention.
Okay. Stephen.
Val, why a work plan? I mean, I also want to get stuff done in this committee, but no subcommittees have work plans. Instead, it seems to me they have scopes for how they're responsible for interacting with the central administration. And to me, the overall charge is ensuring that the ways that we're interacting relates to aligning district work with PSB goals and values. But I haven't seen that culminate in a work plan before. Is this, will you say more about what you're thinking with the work plan?
Yeah, it's so that it's a little bit for Janae's sake, so that we're not, that we have very specific pieces that we're working on annually, right? Like things are going to come up that we're going to hear from community on, that we're going to respond to. But in terms of what we are, it's a little bit like the accountability plan that we've heard about, right, from Brown and other places, except that we're, as a public school district, we don't have the resources to bring in lots of other folks to do that work, right, and put together a plan with consultants. So I'm just trying to think about bite-sized chunks that we can do in a year that actually are meaningful and will resonate with the community, be impactful on student experience, educator experience, family experience within a year timeframe. I'm using it just as a year to be a sort of a manageable time frame for us to have a couple of goals. It's really goal setting that I'm talking about in this work plan, right? It's like,
okay, so I guess I'd love to have a little discussion around this, because it seems to me you could accomplish it the way you're proposing, and I'm not sure that I oppose that. But you can also say that I'm just thinking of Leslie's work and the curriculum subcommittee and the way that she laid out a list of short, medium, and long-term priorities. And then the curriculum subcommittee checked in to make more visible and hold accountable her office on their near-term priorities. I wonder if that it could be the same with OEE and OSS, where they list some of their shortest term priorities. OSS with the ones that relate to educational equity, and it's our responsibility to work with them on those issues. I mean,
So
I guess that's
I
the way
think
that
that's what Janae was lining up for us. I mean, Janae, you can speak. for
Oh, I'm
yourself,
sorry. I
but-
thought you were proposing that the subcommittee itself develop a work plan for its work over the next year.
So a bit, right? But I think that they dovetail off of each other. So I think that what Mariah just said about the listening sessions is the important piece certainly on the community front. But if we're talking about just our interaction with central office, then I think that Janae sort of laid out what she thinks would be helpful in the short, near,
Okay,
short term
then-
and longer, right? The 8-year plan and then the sort of next year plan.
Okay, then I guess I'm not disagreeing.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And mine were some recommendations based on
Yeah.
what I've done.
But
and
also
seen.
in the data stories heard, OSS and OTL being involved too, right? Because I
Yep.
see us very much being, this is interdisciplinary work, all of
Yes.
it. So, it's not just Janae where we ask Janae everything about curriculum and, everything else under the sun that's happening, because obviously disability guidance is an OSS,
Mhm.
all the curriculum and,
Right,
other.
so I guess I'm curious then, Val, do you see, I'm not challenging anything, I'm
fine.
thinking out loud. Do you see OTL and OSS also submitting a couple of priority or some priority equity related, some equity related priorities that would then be part of a work plan for this committee? Or does it flow through Janae? How would you see it working?
So I think it would depend, right? It depends on a little bit. It depends on the topic that we're on. I don't think that we need OSS to come to every meeting, just like I don't think we need OTL to come to every meeting. But I think if we're talking about, like, I didn't know until I saw Janae's presentation that there's an actual, it looks like state mandated, Janae, is that right? Program coming out on the SEL, UDL, on that whole piece that you were talking about a pilot on?
It's just more that ultimately the state's going to be asking educators to show some accountability for SEL work and equity work, whether by their goals or there's a whole new curriculum that's sort of being developed. So I'm just saying that down the line, educators are going to be held accountable for this work anyway.
Andy.
Yeah, I guess this is a question for Janae, and it goes back to what Mariah was saying earlier. Like, do you think that this subcommittee has a role to play in figuring out sort of what we should be measuring or what kind of data we should be trying to gather given where we are currently as a district? Or is that something that you think you already have a good enough handle on?
I don't think I have a good enough handle on it, but that might be because I haven't had time yet to really delve into it. That was my hope, to get more into that. Obviously, Casey's pulled a ton of data. There's data that Leslie has pulled. And so I haven't had a lot of time to sort of think about some of the most recent data, whether it's the panorama survey data or we're looking at our recent MCAS data, all of those pieces. So I would say, again, I think of this subcommittee as thought partners and helping vet. If I'm coming to you with different pieces of data, you can say, oh, well, what about this? Like, that's right, I need to collect this. Or even what you mentioned about the data stories, sharing those here, just being able to have a space to do that. And then having what you all have to say about that, and even questions, requests, that's going to help me.
Yeah, like that STEPS presentation at school committee was really interesting, like, because there were data there, but the discussion revealed that, well, there are these other data that would help to set that in the proper context.
Exactly.
And I think Linus heard Mariah's request again for that data, and I would ask it again. And it's
I'm
a
gonna
lot.
fourth
It's a lot of
myself
data.
too.
You're gonna fourth yourself? Okay, good. Suzanne.
Yeah, thanks, Val. This is just an aside. I'm wondering if Erin can help you, Janae, with some of that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's kind of her work, so.
Yeah. She,
yeah.
exactly. And
I wouldn't hesitate to ask her to help.
thank you. I'm remiss in not mentioning Erin because she came and sat down with me just a couple weeks ago and we went through all the MCAS data together. So absolutely.
Oh, good. Because I mean, that's what she does. So I'm hoping she's helpful to you.
Absolutely.
I don't know about the listening sessions. I feel like whenever we don't know what to do, we have a listening session, and then a lot of people have had a chance to talk, or we've listened to people. So a listening session alone, I don't know, Mariah, I'm just struggling with it.
Wait, you need to say this again because I'm afraid I'm misunderstanding you and I want to make sure I don't misunderstand you.
Well, I feel like we always say when we don't know what to do that we'll do a listening session. And, but I don't know that it goes anywhere. And I don't know if sometimes people get frustrated because they say, well, we're telling you, but nothing's happening. And so I get a little nervous about what are we going to,
When was the last time we went to public housing and did a listening session? When was the last time we did one with our EL families? Or our METCO families?
Yeah, I don't know that for sure, but I know that we've had input from some of those groups. And I know, Bridge as a group has come a lot, not with Janae, right before Janae took on this position. It may be just fine and it may meet a need, but I'm just putting out a little caution to not just listen, but to do something with that information. Because Janae's had, a year. Janae, you've had a year with kind of entry findings, like Linus has done with the district. You've kind of done that with equity. And so, we can also hear what you have to say. So I'm not saying I'm against it, Mariah. I'm just having a little bit of caution when that is the answer. And so, I think we may want to do some of the work ourselves as a school committee. I mean, what work have we done as a school committee around equity? Are we all on the same page? Where probably not. Where are the journeys and how far apart are we? And we haven't really done the work that I'm aware of, and it may well be time to do that work so that then we can be supportive and helpful. Just a thought.
I have a question for either Janae or Dr. Guillory. The other piece, I think, in terms of how I look at this committee's work would be to be a sounding board and a thought partner, if you will, on what's going to be in the strategic plan as it relates to equity issues. And so I'm wondering, Janae, if what you presented as sort of your recommendations for us are what you think are landing in the strategic plan, or if there are other equity pieces that are in the strategic plan. Or Dr. Guillory, I know it's a document in progress, but I do think that that's going to be an important piece of the work that we do is, working on the goals articulated in the district strategic plan.
So for the strategic planning process, we're going to actually start with the school committee in July at the workshop to do that part of visioning. So the intent is that for the aspects of the work that would go into this education plan would be certainly my entry findings, Janae's entry findings, and certainly the work from special education as well as teaching and learning. I'm going to provide those over to Dr. Likas so that she can do some pre-work on that, but we're actually going to develop this plan as a community to come up with the broad goals, and then we'll be able to drill down into the actionable goals that we want to follow up on. So it's not me or the senior team sitting in a room creating, it's actually going to be a community-wide effort that pulls this together.
Okay, so would we have that, Dr. Guillory, this year? I'm just trying to see how it would fit in with work that we do.
The work will start. We'll start the visioning processes this summer with committee, as well as with the leadership team, and then the focus groups, community forums, all of those types of things, then get launched in the September, October timeframe.
Okay,
So it will be a thorough, exhaustive process in developing that plan.
Mariah?
I do want to agree wholeheartedly with what Suzanne said earlier about the committee doing the work itself as well. When I go back to our statement, we believe we talked at the time about having our own anti-bias training.
Yes.
And so I would like to see if perhaps, I don't know about during our workshop or during an additional workshop, that we would have someone come in to facilitate that. And I don't want to put that on Janae. Because I want whoever it is to feel completely comfortable calling us out. And I don't want there to be any weird power dynamics with Janae. And B, because Janae clearly has her hands more than full. So it would be great
You
to
don't have
have.
to worry about that, Mariah.
I don't even want to put you into that position, but I do think it's really important that, as Suzanne said, that the committee does its own work as well.
Totally agree. I don't know, Suzanne, well, Suzanne's still on, but Andy, vice chair, is that fully programmed at this point?
I mean, this Thursday, probably next Thursday, I don't think
Oh,
so.
no, I meant the July workshop.
Oh, the
sorry.
workshop? No, I don't think it's fully programmed, although, there's a lot of stuff going on. So something long would probably not fit in too well at this stage.
Okay, we can look at maybe just a separate session.
Yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say really quickly, I love that idea too, obviously, and it certainly doesn't have to be me, and I would love to share with you all or give you a little bit of an insight into what district educators are getting, just so that you have some sense of what that work is looking like for the system.
That would be great. And if you have like 3 names of people you want to just recommend too, who could do an outside training for us, that would be phenomenal. But
Okay,
we
think
don't,
about that.
yeah.
I also, Val, got a list of a couple facilitators from Colin Stokes.
Oh,
So,
great.
yeah.
And Colin, I think, is in the attendees, so excellent. So I don't think that we are anywhere sort of complete with this. We have some good starter ideas. Oh, sorry, Stephen, your hand's up.
Just getting back to your initial prompt for this conversation, Val, about the priorities. I took a screenshot, Janae, of your slide on the suggested priorities, and the system-wide vision.
I can share the whole deck.
That's okay. I got it. The system-wide vision-based plan, that seems to me like supporting the development of that plan seems like the most urgent priority for this committee, because this committee is a response to a problem, right? And one of the first tasks to me, it seems to be, would be to lay a foundation for a response. So to me, that starts with the development of that plan. So I guess I'm just voting right now, or not voting. I'm rooting on 2B as a very high short-term priority for this committee to be in support of OEE. Maybe that's obvious to everyone, but I'm just like working this through in my head.
Sorry, what's 2B again? I'm like lost because I can't see what you're looking at.
It's the system-wide vision-based plan, the development of a vision, essentially, and actions around and how to achieve that vision. I remember a long time ago, like a year ago, Janae, I asked you in a meeting with additional resources, could your office create a strategic plan like that? And you're like, yeah, with additional resources. Right now I'm one person, and so now some extra resources are coming aboard. So I think, to me, that's the I'm just repeating myself. That seems like the top short-term priority to me.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the question though for you, Janae, is that a short-term priority? I mean, is that a short-term deliverable?
Defining the vision is short term enough. Executing it, implementing it is the long term, right? But yes, no, definitely.
But like, I wonder if, yeah, I would love to support like a short term, in the short term, the development of a vision, and that we could be thought partners in developing to the extent that you want us to be thought partners, and then an action plan or roadmap for achieving it that can be an evolving document that's essentially the, you know, the mandate for how we interact with you through this subcommittee, Janae, and others, but mostly you.
I really like that. That's good. Thank you.
Also, as long as I'm talking, I just want to put in another note of support for the listening sessions. I hear what you're saying, Suzanne. I feel like those are sometimes venting sessions that don't necessarily have constructive outlets. But I think, I just think there's so much grievance right now around these, around the issues that the subcommittee is going to cover, it, that it would really behoove us at the outset to listen as carefully as possible and have as nuanced an understanding of what these problems are. Like, I think we started with MCAS disparities, then we moved on to the hate incidents, then we moved on to Metco kids feeling uncomfortable and kids of color saying, well, saying at BHS that they felt discriminated against. I think having a deep understanding of these problems at the outset will really be useful to this committee.
I think the more for that, for deeper understanding, I'm not sure listening sessions do much for that. I think we would, what I would appreciate more would be sort of more extended or deeper interactions with, you know, possibly fewer people. Yeah, and this also goes for our school committee listening sessions generally. I would actually like to be able to spend a whole day with somebody and kind of, you know, participate in their life rather than have a large number of people come through and speak for a couple minutes. Yeah.
But that's not, I mean, I feel like we can do both, right, Andy? Like I like the channel of the public comment providing a broad swath of response, but then we can shadow people as we build those relationships as we like, I think, in addition.
Yeah, I mean, I think getting to shadow people requires a big commitment on our part and a push to make it happen, because there are, you know, there are things in the way of that.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, Andy, on the things being in the way, you know, I think that we have to be mindful of whom we're asking time of and what their schedules are like, what their other commitments are like, what language barriers there may be, any other cultural barriers and things like that, so that we're transportation, so that we're actually, you know, being as accessible as possible. So I actually liked, like, for example, Mariah's idea of BHA housing, because you know, we could just use the community room and have as many people, and we could do a couple of sessions, one maybe on a weekend and one on a, you know, an evening, weekday evening, and see how that went. And as an example, I agree that it could become a lot, but I also think that it's really imperative that we hear directly from community. And I think from there, there'll be people who then want to engage more deeply on a more regular basis. But I think that will be a sort of natural flow from those sessions. I may be completely wrong about that, but that would be my hope. So I just want to make sure I took notes. I know Robin's taking notes, but I just want to make sure that I accurately am reflecting this when I put the just draft document together. Stephen was very clear on the vision, and I think that that's hugely important. Mariah, the listening sessions, and then you had the feedback tool. Was that that you thought was maybe the number one?
Feedback tool? What does feedback tool
I
mean?
don't know. I maybe my handwriting's terrible. I was writing down what you had said was maybe.
I wanted to
above.
have the data too, the data and the and being
data
able to provide feedback to Janae and her work.
Right.
Sort of being, yes.
Yeah. The feedback loop to Janae and team and others. And then the data stories. Was that?
Yeah, can I make one comment on data stories? I heard Andy saying that he might like more stories sort of spread out, or like shorter stories. And I think the problem with that is that when we hear each story in isolation, we don't get a systemic view of what's going on. And so I really, really, really want to, maybe we can do it Andy's way too, but I want to see that data that I asked for all at once in one go.
I want to see that data too, Mariah. So I agree on that. And I think that in my mind, they're not mutually exclusive. I think the data story piece, and in the way that Andy was talking about it as a, 5-minute snapshot in a sort of spotlight on excellence, although it could be a not excellent moment for 5 or 10 minutes, would be useful once a month at school committee, so that we're
No,
hearing
I
that.
agree
But
they're
I
not.
totally agree that we need to see all of the data across all of the demographics.
Yeah,
So-
I just wanted to make clear that it wasn't one instead of the other. It could be
Yeah.
both.
Okay. Yeah. And then Andy, a priority that we missed.
Well, nothing that's been missed, no.
Okay.
Can I say one quick thing about the data stories? Sorry, since we keep mentioning them. I do, the quantitative data obviously is super important, but I'm also interested in, and I had another presentation during school when Steph's presented, but the qualitative data, so that these aren't just numbers, like the story part, the narrative parts are really important to me. Sometimes that takes a little bit more time to collect. But when I say data stories, I meant not just the numbers, here's where our EL students are currently, but what are some of the stories there? Just so that we have the story or stories. Just wanted to add that part.
Yeah, I mean, I think that in my mind anyway works well with the model that Andy was talking about, in the same way that Dr. Guillory sort of hands the mic over to the folks who are doing that work. Similarly, someone other than you could be the person who presents that story. And I mean, I guess there's we'd have to figure out how to address student issues on that, and privacy and things like that, but I'm sure we can figure out a way.
Yeah, there's ways to do it. And I think Suzanne mentioned, Azavia's anecdote, her story, like some of those stories, there's ways of sharing some of those pieces and obviously not using names or whatever, but I just think those parts are important.
Well, I really agree, Janine. I think when you have a story, some particular person's narrative, that becomes personal. And when you hear percent, although that gives you the big picture, it's the personal stories, I think, that can really help you understand what those percents mean. And so, again, we have to figure out how to do that. Not everybody wants to come forward with their personal stories, but I think there's ways we could tell a story of an individual with their permission, of course, but maybe without revealing their identity.
Yeah, we've been able to do a little bit of focus group work this year with students, and those are really easy ways of sharing without naming names.
So I'm just being mindful of time, and we have a couple of things to talk about. I don't want to give the equity policy short shrift, so I'm wondering what the subcommittee's pleasure is on taking it up at our next meeting or starting with it right now.
I think next meeting.
Could I ask one question about it? It shouldn't take long, which is I would, at least the staff section, I would like to see rewritten to be much more specific about actions that we would be taking or encouraging in the service of retention and hiring. And I have some ideas about what to put in. We can also consult, but it's only worth doing if the subcommittee as a whole wants it done. So I'm wondering what the sentiment is about that. Right now, it's a torso as far as I'm concerned, like the draft policy, right? There's we need to start spelling out like what are some of the practices that the district should be undertaking.
So Stephen was nodding. Is that an affirmative, Stephen?
Yeah, that sounds reasonable.
I agree, Andy. Mariah?
I guess I want to be thoughtful about leaving room for staff to do their work and not predefining or presupposing the work by articulating it in a policy. So to whatever, just walking that line and being sure that we're not over policying when we should be giving latitude and freedom to creatively work.
Yeah, I mean, in policy subcommittee, there's often this back and forth where school committee introduces a draft, which is found to be maybe a little too specific. And then it goes back and forth and back and forth, and eventually we land on something. So right now, I think it errs greatly in the direction of not enough specifics. So, you know, we might come in with something that would be too specific, but at least it's a start.
Okay. Take a crack at, and that's just so everybody knows what was in the packet, what was in the materials was the exact draft that policy had. There'd been no changes made to it. So that's, I want to say 8 months ago or something like that, maybe 7 or 8 months ago, was brought up at a very jam-packed policy meeting. And then we sort of never really got to take it up. So it's been moved here. So we can start to tackle the back and forth on that. And happy to put that as agenda item 1 on our next meeting.
Can I ask a question? Is someone or some people being assigned to make suggestions rather than?
I mean, I could work on an expanded draft of at least the staff section, if people are okay with that.
I'm good with that. With a red line version that we can comment on next meeting.
Sure.
And we will go back and forth on it because
Yeah.
we always do with policies. So before any new or other business, the liaisons, I just wanted to report. I don't have much to report on the Metco liaison, but Stephen and I actually met, I don't know, it's a couple months ago now, it feels like, with the chair of the Metco PTO and discussed the liaison possibility. And she herself was not interested in that proposition, thought that it wouldn't be a particularly active role, and that she herself would be frustrated in a non-voting member scenario. I promised her, and I did send her the Weston example and how they have it described and how it works there. And she was going to present it to the full PTO to see if there's anybody who was interested and to gauge level of interest in such a position. And I emailed her again about a week ago, and I pinged her again today, and I haven't heard back. So I don't have much to say other than her own reaction was that she thought it would be a perhaps not fulfilling and frustrating place to be in that scenario.
Yeah, I'll just add to that to say that she said she didn't want any symbolic position, and she said that she thought professional development was the key, if not only, tool to move forward. I'm interested in what she makes of the example you provided for her, Val. I continue to feel that MECO families just simply don't have representation on the school committee, and there are other groups that don't have that representation. But as we're trying to address a problem, it seems valuable to me to find ways to better represent those families. So it seems something that it's worth discussing in more detail in this committee. Val, are you coming to the place where you think it's probably not a good idea?
I want to wait for feedback. Like I don't want to be driving this train, right? Like I think that this has to come from the groups that we're talking about, and if it has to be that they actually want to participate in this way, and in the same, we're limited by state law in terms of
Right.
voting pieces, and town meeting had problems with 16 and 17-year-olds and non-citizens who live in Brookline. So it gets more complicated when we have folks who are living outside of Brookline who are trying to perhaps get to vote in Brookline school committee elections. And when I raised it, I raised it beyond just our state rep. I raised it with a state senator, and their retort to me was that if, and this was in Metco, or around Metco specifically, that that would be advocacy work that they thought that Metco should drive at the state level if that was of interest. You know, their impression was that if it were, it probably would have been brought up, but it, you know, it gets challenging, right? Because you want to vote for your mayor and your state rep where you live, and like, how do you do that logistically, and how does that work, and how does it work on ballots here? I don't want to be, I mean, you know, I was very disappointed with how town meeting voted on the other two groups that we discussed. So I don't really want to go down a town meeting rabbit hole at the moment, but it hasn't been a great experience for diversity and inclusion at the town meeting level.
Have you approached other groups, Val or Stephen, to participate? I remember the AALSP coordinator reached out to perhaps have students participate, or?
So I talked to scholars, not about, are you talking about a liaison position?
I remember she reached out. I don't remember any of the
Yeah,
details,
no,
and I
so
didn't-
nothing, not about a liaison position. We just had a conversation about sort of priorities and thoughts for the committee. And we're gonna have another conversation. Wanted to have another conversation after we sort of began and got a little bit further ahead in our work. So I actually think that that's a good group for us to have a listening session with, quite frankly, as one of the many. I mean, I was just doing in my head, Mariah, the listening sessions, and there are probably 30 off the top of my head that we probably need to do in some
Yeah.
methodical way. Right, because just thinking through all of the issues that need to be addressed, I think that there are probably at least 30. I'll look back and follow up again with scholars on where we left off with our conversation. Any other thoughts on other liaisons to think about at the moment, or should we wait until we hear from Metco folks?
Can I ask a question? Are these liaisons for this subcommittee or for school committee?
No, for school committee.
Okay.
So there are a couple of districts in the state that have non-voting members of school committee who are Metco parents. But because of all the voting laws, they're not residents, so they're not voting members of the school committee. And so, as Stephen and I both said, that, you know, when we talked to Metco PTO chair, that was just something that sounded very like frustrating.
Val, can I get clarity on that? Because I didn't realize we were talking about general liaisons to school committee. And I wonder if there might be people who are interested in participating in this subcommittee, but not full school.
Exactly. That's exactly where I was going, Mariah, because I really feel it's important to have student representation. I was going to wait until new business, but.
So yeah, those were for the, so it's actually Suzanne who I think her first charge to us when this committee was formed was that the first question we were supposed to look at was the Metco liaison piece. So as promised, I at least did some work on that, but that was intended as a school committee liaison. That had come up as a school committee liaison, but I agree that representation on this subcommittee is something for us to talk about. So you were talking about students, Janae. I mean, I'm sort of curious to what extent and to what at different meetings? I mean, I certainly want voices. So I guess the question is, are they liaisons? Are they invited guests for a particular topic? Like, how are people thinking about this?
I was imagining a liaison. I know it's not the same thing, but almost like what Claire has done with school committee. I know it's not the same, but it just feels important as we talk about equity work with, students are our largest constituent. It just feels really important that there's a student representative.
So yeah, but in my view, that can't just be one, right? Like then we would need more. This is my personal view anyway. We need one from the various, I don't know, like various ethnic groups, various racial groups, various sexual orientation, disability, gender. I mean, so I guess the question is how to do that without making it unwieldy, and also not, I guess I also don't want to waste students' time if we're not going to be talking about something on that agenda day. So I'm sort of curious. I just threw out a lot of like brain material, so I'm wondering what people think about that.
I'll just share my 2 cents. I don't think that that's a good idea to try to have a representative from every identity group. But I think 1, maybe even 2 students representing student voices and somebody who can go back and help with getting some of that information or whatever. I think that that's still 1 or 2 is better than 0.
Okay. Stephen, Andy, Mariah, Suzanne?
Yeah, I'm thinking, so obviously student voice is important. And the question is how to get student voice on this committee in a way that is useful. So I think if we were to have a representative, that position would have to be tasked with the responsibility of coordinating student voice, not just, I mean, that's kind of what Claire did, but I think we'd have to make it even more explicit that for the reasons you said just now, Val, that there's such a range of experiences that kids are going to have to bring. So I was also envisioning something like a standing docketed part of the agenda reserved for student voice, but I wasn't thinking that it would be through a student liaison. I was thinking that it would be almost like public comment for students, or we would invite one or another group that has DEI focus to speak at it. So I could see multiple mechanisms bringing that student voice. I just think that if it's an individual, that individual would have to be tasked with the responsibility of coordinating voices from various groups really explicitly.
Mariah?
I feel super uncomfortable with asking a student to feel like they have to be responsible for collecting everyone else's input. I think that that's just putting a burden on someone who might have their own various levels of burden already. And I don't want to impose that kind of a requirement on a student. And I think that we could, I agree with Janae that we don't need to have a representative of every subgroup. And I think that what we could do is perhaps have, maybe multiple slots, and maybe sometimes people show up and sometimes they don't. And it's not like an obligation. And we encourage them to come, especially if they have something that they want to share. But I see it being much more flexible to accommodate student need, as opposed to a job, and as opposed to being a huge number of people.
Yeah, so more of a public comment section.
Well, but more formal than that. They might have an actual, liaison role or something like that. But it also isn't like they have to come every time. And they certainly don't have to go out and poll 2,000 other students to, see what's going on. I don't want to sort of presuppose a peak level of executive function that many people don't possess. So most people don't possess.
Yeah. Andy?
I guess my view is actually the exact opposite of Mariah's. I would think that if we are going to have a student rep or reps, they should be full participants in the meeting. Like I would like them to stay the entire time, participate in the discussions and deliberations. I mean, I guess they couldn't vote, but the voting is almost never the point of a subcommittee meeting anyway. I think bringing in people just to give a presentation and then leave or stay silent the rest of the time is not a terribly useful model here, in my view.
But that's not what I said, Andy. I said they're not required to stay. I didn't say they aren't allowed to stay or anything like that.
Yeah, but
Just like Claire, we don't require Claire to stay.
Right, and she doesn't. She doesn't participate in school committee deliberations. Perhaps she could, but she doesn't. And I think if we're going to have a representative on the subcommittee, I would like them to actually be full participants. And they need not represent anybody but themselves. But it clearly should be somebody who thinks a lot about these issues. Not that they have to go out taking polls every week in order to, in order to tell us how many people think X and how many people think Y. But it should be somebody who thinks deeply about these things for him or herself and is a full participant in these meetings.
Janae, how are you envisioning this person either self-selecting or it being advertised in the student community?
I feel like I know so many student leaders, social justice leaders who are chomping at the bit to do what Anthony described, or what Andy described, sorry. But whatever process, I guess we want to advertise it, but there is obviously a lot of support among students in Brookline for this subcommittee to exist. So
I think we could address Mariah's concern about not overburdening students also with limiting their term to like 3 months, so that we could have like rotating students who attend 3 meetings, then pass it over to the next person. That would also help us get a range of voices. I hear what you're saying, Mariah, that it's not the students' work to do this, but I think I'm just thinking about like the principles of positive youth development also offer agency to the participants so that they really feel like have a meaningful impact on the committee. I do think people would jump at that work.
me too.
So I guess I'm feeling now somewhere in between, like that having, I'm making this number up arbitrarily, but 4 slots for students, and sort of to address what Mariah's saying, and I agree with, that they attend or don't attend that particular meeting. And if they attend all of them, great. And if they don't, then that's also fine. I don't know what people think about that, so that there are multiple slots.
Will you say more about why you're thinking multiple slots, Phil?
In some ways for the same reason that, quite frankly, that Weston actually has a rotating METCO representative on their school committees, so that nobody feels burdened to go to every single meeting, especially as a non-voting member, so that they have a little bit of ability to choose when they're participating.
I guess my preference would be closer to a rotating individual member, because I think that's basically asking for a 3 meeting commitment from somebody or whatever we decide. I don't think that's a heavy burden. I think a lot of students would find that a real opportunity to talk to the people in power.
So I guess I was thinking of it slightly differently, Stephen, which is that depending on which 3 meetings you get, you may have a deep dive in something and then miss the whole. Whereas if you have a few slots for students and they attend, I don't know, 6 out of 8 meetings, they look at the agenda and they attend 5 out of 8 or 6 out of 8 or however many that they attend, that they have some choice in that, and that we address the burden, because I really don't want to put a burden, that's like the balance here is the burden on students, right? Like we want to lift up student voices without burdening them. I don't know. Andy, Mariah? Suzanne? Andy?
I mean, I just think that if this is worth doing at all, it's worth committing to. I would just rather have somebody who cares enough to actually be present at every meeting and to follow all these discussions as they unfold over time. And Janae, I don't want to put words in your mouth. You seem to be saying that you do know students who probably are willing to have that level of commitment.
I do.
Mariah?
I was going to suggest that maybe we could ask for our next meeting that maybe Janae could solicit some participants, like, or something like that, so that maybe we start with some students and see how it goes. Rather than trying to like build this, model before we've seen it a little bit in practice, maybe we can start to precede it and then see how it goes.
Sounds like a good plan. Suzanne?
I'm still wondering a little bit about the 3 or 4. If we had 4 students at a meeting, I don't know how much time they would each have. It just feels like a lot of people at a subcommittee meeting. You know how much we like to talk. And I want to be sure they have, whoever comes would have opportunity to talk. If there's 4 of them, I'm afraid that some of them won't talk, or they'll feel they don't have enough time. So anyway, I'm kind of leaning more towards fewer rather than 4. 4 felt like a lot.
I think 2 might be a good number. That way, if one can't make it, that at least somebody is there, and ideally they can both be there.
Janae, would you be willing to feel out folks for our next meeting? We'll get you that
Sure.
date so that
Sure.
students can, a few students can attend and see what it's like and see if they are interested in joining in this capacity.
I wonder even if Val, if this isn't too much, if we might even consider docketing a discussion of what form representation we can have from students and invite students to comment, just to get a range of interested students to give their opinion on how they could best be represented in this committee. That might be more work than is necessary, but.
Well, my sense from what Mariah said was that was essentially what we would get. And Mariah, I don't want to be misquoting you if that's not what you were intending for the next meeting.
Sorry, I missed what was just said. There was an accident at my house. Say it again.
Stephen had mentioned something, and I thought that it was essentially what you were saying, and with just different words, but I didn't want to speak for you. So Stephen, can you just?
It's okay. It's okay. If we're coming to a consensus around getting a bunch of students to talk this through with us next time, however we do it, sounds good to me.
My feeling is we're not binding ourselves to any one model right now. We're going to test it out, see how it goes, and iterate, right? So 2, 4, 3, whatever, we'll figure this out.
Yeah, and we'll invite students to the next meeting and see how they feel about the model. I think was the part that Stephen was suggesting, Mariah, that we just, that we get a sense from them of.
Great.
Yeah. Suzanne.
And just a quick detail, is your next meeting in July, and will students be available in the summer?
My question too.
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that Robin sent out looking for September dates.
I think September might be better for the students than July and August.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay,
Well,
so
can we check with them though? Are we not going to meet over the summer? It would feel really inglorious for this committee to have one meeting and then not meet for 3 months.
I completely agree. I think we can meet in July, but I think, can we ask the students, Janae, whether they'll be around in July? And if not,
Sure. Yeah, I can.
not,
Yeah.
interest for September.
I think that what came out of this though is the consensus that student voice is critical on this committee.
Yes.
Good.
Yeah,
We'll figure out the form.
Okay, so it's 10 minutes over. I don't want to keep folks. Any other business for today? Motion to adjourn, anyone? Andy. Seconded
So
by
moved.
Stephen.
Second.
Okay, here we go. Thank you, everybody, for being here, and we'll see you at our July meeting. Thanks.
Thank you for being this
Thank
chair,
you.
Val.
Thank you all.